beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. This one is certainly very special, and within this video I'll be sharing a full guide to the recipe and brewing of my tried and tested recipe for a celebration ale that I have aptly named Nectar of the Gods. So let's get started. Within this guide I will take you through all of the steps in order, starting with a look at my recipe's vital statistics. As you can see, this recipe offers just over 10% ABV, and I would not suggest adjusting this very much at all, as it certainly is the sweet spot. This recipe, like all of my shared recipes, is written by me and can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. Like all of my shared recipes, this recipe is very tried and tested, so brew with confidence. You'll also find a link to the full recipe on Brewfather, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. I do suggest that you fully convert my recipe before ordering in your ingredients so that you're actually brewing the recipe as intended. I also suggest that you brew this recipe as is the first time, rather than tweaking it. Resisting that temptation, I promise you, will be worth it. I have an easy guide video to recipe conversion using Brewfather on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video, this recipe is being brewed using the Brewzilla 65 litre Gen 4 system to the volume of just 10 litres, or approximately 2.64 US liquid gallons. However, as part of the conversion process, this can be scaled and shaped to suit your own brewing system and volume requirements. Do note though with this one that regular sized brewing systems will probably need 2 mashes if you brew a larger sized batch. I have a video that covers this way of brewing using the Grainfather G30, but these techniques can be applied to other brewing systems too. Shown on screen is the water profile that I preferred in developing this recipe, which is found on Brewfather. This balanced profile works really well for this recipe. I suggest that you plan your water profile ahead. After all, beer is mostly water and its balance is important, so that it suits the beer that you are brewing. Brewfather also has very good documentation on how to use the software to make the necessary water changes too. For this reason, I suggest that all brewers, irrespective of experience, start treating their water as soon as possible for the very best of end results. Let's now move on to the actual brew itself, which starts with preparing for our mash. Here I have already preheated my mash water to the first mash step temperature, and have also then added my grain. You can see that at the next point I am using a stainless steel mixer to stir in my grain, ensuring that all of the grains are wet. You can do this manually using a mash paddle too. In fact, I used to do that an awful lot, and you'll see most of my videos show this method. However, these days I'm using this mixer on a drill because it simply saves time and keeps efficiency high. Shown on screen now is the mash schedule for this brew. You can see that this one has a mash-in temperature higher than for a regular brew. This is due to the simple fact that for this one we want to make some of the sugars unfermentable for our yeast to build body and to enable a finish to the beer's taste that is far from dry. With all the grain nicely mixed in, I have now started the mash, so let's now look at our fermentables for this recipe. At 62%, our main fermentable here is pale ale malt. This malt also essentially provides a nice canvas for us to build flavour onto. At 24% we have Munich malt, which adds in a very nice, more intense malty flavour, as well as a little extra colour. And then at 12.4% we have light Muscovado sugar. This is not part of our mash, and this is added during the boil. More on this later. Then finally at 1.6% we have Carapils or Carafoam. These add a little to the body of the beer, but here are mainly used in this recipe for improving foam and its stability. After the mash, I raised the grain basket and set the system's temperature to start ramping up for the boil. I then began the sparge process using a jug to manually and evenly add in the sparge water. The trick here for a more efficient sparge and also to maintain flavour is to try not to rush this process. Only add rice hulls if your sparge is stuck rather than to speed it up. Another area that is counterproductive is to add too much sparge water all at once. The amount that you see me sparge to above the top plate here is a good level. Let's now move on to the boil stage after I've cleared the head of protein. Here you can see me adding the hop addition, which is Warrior. This hop is used for bittering, and as it is always having a high alpha acid percentage, it tends to be very economic, along with having a very mild flavour. I personally favour Warrior and use it quite a lot, as it also has its own very smooth bittering quality. If you cannot obtain Warrior, then Magnum or Columbus can also be used. No other hop additions are used for this brew. The flavours present in this recipe come from our grain bill and our yeast, plus also our sugar, which I'll come on to now. Almost 12.5% of our fermentables from this recipe come from the use of Muscovado sugar. I suggest adding this in the last 5 to 10 minutes in the boil, ensuring that it has totally dissolved before you finish the boil. A great way to add this is via a hop spider, as this will ensure that it doesn't burn on the bottom, causing a mess for you to clean up, potentially spoiling the flavours for you too. Muscovado sugar is made up of either beet or cane sugars that contain natural molasses. When buying this sugar in a store, you will likely have a choice of colour from light brown to almost black, and I suggest going to a light version for this recipe, but certainly the darker versions will have their place too. The end effect of adding this sugar is firstly that it will add in some very nice dark fruit and rum-like flavours into the mid-background of this beer's taste profile, which will add a nice decadent quality to it. The other pro to this is that you are building higher levels of alcohol without adding more body, making this recipe easier drinking wise despite the higher ABV. Towards the end of the 30-minute boil, I ran boiling hot water through my counterflow chiller for a few minutes to sanitize it, ready for the cooling stage. If you were using a different type of chiller, like for example an immersion chiller, then you would also want to add it into the boil in the final minutes to ensure that it is also sanitary. It was then time to cool and transfer our wort. This recipe uses 2 different types of yeast, so as such is a co-fermentation. Co-fermentations are certainly popular within commercial brewing because you can enjoy characteristics from both yeast types. In this case we are using Voss Kveik yeast and Verdant IPA yeast. Both yeast types are added at the start to our fermenter using the temperature of 20 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The reasons to use Voss Kveik is for its fast fermentation and fast conditioning times, meaning that even a brew of this strength can be in a drinkable state in around 4 to 6 weeks. At the chosen temperature, this Kveik will not move as quickly as it can, which will give the Verdant IPA yeast the 3 days that it needs to add in its signature tropical fruity flavours, which is the reason we also want Verdant around. Do not be tempted to lower or raise this fermentation temperature, because this is quite simply the sweet spot. You can expect this one on this basis to ferment out in about 3 to 5 days. I always leave mine in the fermenter for at least 7 days though, before transferring into a keg. This gives the yeast time to clean up after itself. Let's now look at the finished beer along with my tasting notes. You can see that the pour is very much a beautiful golden, but once in the glass the end beer appears to be on the golden orange side. This beer is in its natural state and no attempts have been made to clear it whatsoever. That is because personally I prefer a more natural look, but the choice is totally yours once you brew this. This beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is 0.83 bars, and I'm also using this pressure for serving too. The example you see here is at around the 6-week point from kegging, and despite its strength, this is when I feel that this beer is good and ready thanks to the Voss Kveik and its influence on the conditioning time. For this one I recommend a drinking temperature of between 7 to 10 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of between approximately 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, as temperatures lower than this will simply hide flavour, which would certainly be a pity. Here are my personal tasting notes at this 6-week point as follows. Aroma. This beer has a very fresh, subtle fruit aroma that is led by apricot, but there are certainly also undertones of tropical and dark fruit with a touch of citrus. Flavour. Flavour-wise you are straight into a fruity mix which is mostly led by apricot, but as you approach the finish this turns into more darker fruit, along with rum flavouring which feels rich and indulgent. As you move further down the glass, new flavours are often discovered which can include plum, blackcurrant and blueberry, which tend to be laced with rum and apricot. And here are some notes. This certainly is a very indulgent tasting beer, but I've found that it also wins the hearts of those that aren't usually beer drinkers due to its variation of flavouring. Do be careful though, at just over 10% ABV, this should be sipped and enjoyed like a fine cognac, rather than gulped down like a lager. And here is my final impression. A special beer for a special celebration. This very fruity beer will please many with its inoffensive yet indulgent flavouring despite its high ABV. A glass or two of this one will certainly get the party started. So there you have my tasting notes. I'd be very happy to see yours via the comments section of this video once you have this one brewed and ready for drinking. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!